Welcome back, everybody. Our next speaker is Jonny Enoch. I only met Jonny mid-ish 2018, but man, I'm glad every day that I was blessed that meeting happened. Thank you, Jordan Pease. I kind of characterize Jonny as our own Renaissance man. He has a huge heart, an open mind, and a passion for understanding all the truths that impact our very existence as human beings. And once you meet him, you will not forget him, and he will become one of your favorite human beings as well. But this brings us to the real question you ask. Is he really human? We present, you decide. Please welcome Jonny Enoch.
Hey. Thanks, Bob. How's everybody feeling this morning? Did you get enough coffee? I think Dr. Greer calls coffee element 115. That's what really powered the crafts at Roswell. Today's presentation is called Ancient Stargates and Advanced Civilizations. And I'm pretty sure that we already passed a few advanced civilizations with the green aliens in the lobby, and we have these machines downstairs that if you put your money into them, somehow they disappear. So, could be a Stargate for your wallet. But today I'd like to dedicate this presentation to Bob Brown, the man that was just on stage, okay? This man has done so much for ufology. He's been doing this for over 30 years, put on over 21 different conferences. His conferences are really the blueprint, the schematic, everything that people use today. It's because of him. It's because of what he did that we can all be here. And of course, we got to thank Gord, who convinced him to come out of retirement and said, hey, Bob, if you do that, I'll back you. But there's been so many great people that work behind the scenes today, from Heather and Nikki, all of you that have made a difference, and I want to thank you also. But we also want to remember Terry Brown, Bob's late wife. I believe she's with us today. And you know what? Before I came here, people would constantly come up to me and they would tell me, do you know what I remember about these conferences? I remember Bob. I remember Terry's loving presence, her passion for this subject. But something you might not all know is that if you've ever watched the movie A Race to Witch Mountain with The Rock, can I see a show of hands? Any of you ever seen that movie? Okay, great movie, right? You know in the scenes where they're going to the UFO conference and they call it the Nut Job Convention? That was at one of Bob Brown's conferences. The Walt Disney Company approached him and said, hey, Bob, we know your conferences are the best. We want to use them in our movies. And I think that's pretty impressive. But another guy that was key behind the scenes is the great Colonel Wendell Stevens, who, in my opinion, is the greatest ufologist we've seen. He was, in my opinion, the greatest expert on the Plagiarians and the Billy Meyer case we've ever seen, with no exception. And he always put an emphasis on not only just being a governmentologist, that's someone who uses those Freedom of Information Act documents only to base their opinion on UFOs, but he looked at what the contactees are saying. He was a ufologist. So Bob always tells me, he says, Jonny, don't be a tire kicker. Don't be a window shopper. You got to dig in deeper. So in honor of Colonel Wendell Stevens, tonight we're going to be listening to what our great ufologists have looked at with contactee cases and much more. And to get to that point, I really have to thank my dear friend Jordan Pease, who you see in this picture. He's been integral behind this scene. He has done so much for this field. In fact, he has a conference of his own coming up in March, I urge you all to check out, called Mind Gaming. But he has this wonderful library over in Ashland, Oregon. It's called the RVML, the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library. Well, this last summer, I went out for a visit there. I popped by his library, and he says, Jonny, open the back door of your car. I said, what the hell are you doing, Jordan? I don't know what you're doing to my car. He pushes this big box of UFO books into the back of my car. And I said, don't you realize I have enough books? Constantly reading all these books, history books, esoteric books. He says, no, trust me, you got to take these books. You see those books in the middle? That's just a little fraction of the books. So I said, what am I going to do with all these? Luckily, one of my research partners, Ash Staunton, who he doesn't like me to say this, but he's a ufological genius. The man has read literally everything you can ever find on this subject, and he's my research partner. He says to me, stop what you're doing, go grab your highlighter and sit down. I'm going to pull out all the gems out of these books while you're over a cup of coffee. And we started pulling them out. So today, I have to thank these gentlemen for the fact of these contactee cases and more that I'm going to present to you today. So, now that we got all that stuff out of the way, let me introduce myself. My name is Jonny Enoch, obviously, and this funny-sounding name I have is very similar to the guy in the Bible, but I assure you there is no relation. I've tried calling the publishers of the Bible for royalties, and they haven't been picking up my calls since about 325 CE. But my interest in these areas started from a very early age. I was having these unexplainable experiences. Okay? Maybe some of you can relate. I know Garnet Schulhauser can. When I was very, very young, I'd be having these intense out-of-body experiences where I'd be floating above my bed, looking down at myself peacefully, and rising. At other times, I'd be thrust up into these violent, multicolored, holofractal colors and end up in the middle of the universe. I didn't know how I got there. It's very interesting. But I couldn't get any answers in the house where I lived because it was very religious in my parts, at the neck of the woods. So, I'd be around the dinner table at night and I'd be asking certain questions. You couldn't even say the word helicopter, it'd get changed to heavenicopter. So, to get answers, I had to go get all these esoteric books and hide them under the bed, and I look in different sources like Britannica Encyclopedia and so much more. So later on in life, I started using clinical hypnotherapy, psychology and counseling to go into the recesses of the human mind to see that ordinary folks, just like us, have extraordinary memories. This led on these journeys all around the world to sacred temples, crawling on my hands and knees underneath megalithic sites, the likes of my friend Muhammad Ibrahim, who you met, who we're going to discuss, dusting off the sides of the walls of reliefs to try to decode these hieroglyphics to see if there's more. And maybe some of you have seen these adventures that we've had on the Travel Channel, Discovery Channel, where we're talking about elongated skulls and giants, or now in Gaia's deep space. But you might say that my interest in extraterrestrials started from a very early age. This is my sister who I grew up with. It's my little sister. She wouldn't be caught dead at this conference. She has no interest in this whatsoever. In fact, she's more interested in what the Kardashians are doing in Calabasas. But for her, she has an experience that she had from a very early age, at 12 years of age. She was in her bedroom, and what she can draw for you very clearly on a piece of paper, even if you're out for dinner with her today, is that this large gray head appeared into her bedroom window with smooth dolphin-like skin, the large teardrop eyes, absolutely hairless, peering directly at her, mesmerizing her. And right behind that, there was another one that appeared. And she couldn't shake this thought. To this day, it's still with her. My mom said we were complaining of these little gray men coming into our rooms at night. She herself had these strange experiences and dreams of being aboard ships, activity in the backyard that she said was going on for weeks on end, but she prayed it away, according to her. So I don't know if that did anything. But last year coming to these conferences, our good friend Tom Morello, he'd say to me, Johnny, I see at these conferences, people are talking about these Pleiadians, blonde hair, blue eyes, Nordiques. He said, where's all the other aliens with the short copper-skinned brothers like me? He started saying. And he goes, I come to this conference, there's tall whites. And I said to him, Tom, I said, don't worry. We have ET cases all across the world of all different sorts of extraterrestrials from all different sorts of places. One of my favorite cases that goes back is with the Dogon tribes, okay? And we get the Dogon tribes when we go back to Mali in Africa. Have any of you ever heard of the Dogon? Wow, everybody has. We talk about Nomo, was sent by the sky god, Amma. These people believe they're descended from these extraterrestrials in Sirius B, the aquatic planet. They have star systems mapped out, unique abilities, things that they can tell you. This has been going on for a long time. It's not limited to one part of the world. It's not limited to one type of people. It's happened everywhere. It's absolutely ubiquitous. This is Bettina Rodriguez Aguilera, a Republican candidate. Okay? We've heard about, we've heard a lot about the Democrats over the years having Podesta. You've heard of Clinton, heard of Carter. I mean, except for Reagan in the days of Space Force. She said that she had this experience being abducted by extraterrestrials when she was only 7. There was these 3 blonde aliens that took her aboard the ship. Okay? They showed her all kinds of stuff. She said that the heart center of the world was in Africa. She said that there was a cave over in Malta with over 30,000 non-human skulls. Someone called Brian Forrester. Dr. Helen Sharman. This is an incredible woman. She's Britain's first astronaut. She says aliens definitely exist, and they could be living amongst us on Earth. I wouldn't say could be living amongst us. I'd say they are living amongst us. They look just like us, and just like Lawrence Noble was telling you, they attend conferences, and I assure you, they are not only at this conference, but in this audience right now. One of the wisest teachers I ever knew, and still know, calls himself an old Jack from the Outback. And I'd always ask him, I'd say, is there life in the universe? How much life is in the universe? And he'd tell me, go look under about a 1/4 inch of soil in your backyard. He said, when you look under that 1/4 inch of soil in your backyard, you could spend the rest of your life wondering about the life in just that part. We know 98 to 99% of life is existing at the quantum subspace and nanobacteria. So you can take that little patch and you can multiply that by infinity to the power of infinity. That's how much life is in the universe. It's infinite. And in fact, because we learn in our sciences that matter, space, and time are all arranged at the tiniest of scales, I'm going to make a little prediction for you. Have any of you ever seen the movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids with Rick Moranis? Okay, picture this. Picture that you're going to go down to the micro. We're going to go down to that quantum subspace. You're going to find not only that we're talking about that there's consciousness precursors, but you're going to find intelligent civilizations at that level. Our exploration of this universe is going to get so crazy in ways that you never thought possible in the future. We're told now that there's tardigrades on the moon. Did you hear about that? We put these little microscopic water animals up there, and they're living. When you look over at Buzz Aldrin, we know he was the 2nd person on the moon, so he can actually tell you, kneel before me, if you meet him. But we know we landed Apollo 11 on the moon on July 20th, 1969. Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong. Or did we? Did we? Yeah. We got a moon expert in the front. It's actually written a book on it. A lot of people have these videos called, and books out about the moon hoax. Have any of you guys ever seen those? We examine the light anomalies and the way the flag moves, and someone's freeze framing it and taking a ruler out. A lot of fun. But we know we've been to the moon. It's an absolute fact. It's scientific fact. There is mirror reflector experiments on Apollo 11, 14, and 15 where we put reflectors up on the moon. In fact, with areas like the Lunar Observatory and others, we shined lasers up at the moon. And we measure how they bounce back. So we know we've been there. It's an absolute fact. But just like Garnet Schulhauser was saying the other day in his wonderful presentation, and I urge you to buy his books, they're amongst my absolute favorite. He was talking about Neil Armstrong relating an experience when he was still alive that he went up on the moon. Well, we've heard from the likes of the former CIA pilot, John Lear, who is famous for going over to Area 51 with Bob Lazar and Gene Huff, that he says, according to his sources, there's 250 million people living up on the moon. That's a strange fact. 250 million people? Where would he get an idea like that? Timothy Good is one of the most respected and well-known ufologists that there are, okay, when you come out of England. Timothy Good said that he had talked to a retired MI6 agent, and she had said in her conversation with Neil Armstrong, he told her, when we got to the moon, there was a welcoming party there. There were ships already up on the moon. And yes, we did make it to the moon, despite the Van Allen belt. We had help. The Germans were very smart, okay? When we got up there, there was more going on than we could have even imagined. But if we were to fake the moon landing, why would we have purpose? Well, according to what Neil Armstrong told the MI6 agent that told Timothy Good, it was because the CIA wanted to cover it up. So one of the places we get some clues is out of this book, Our Forbidden Moon by David Bryant. He talks about the Cardington hangars. And I know guys like Colin Wolford and Harry Challenger who are here today will know all about these Cardington hangars. In these Cardington hangars, we find that according to anonymous witnesses, that Armstrong and Aldrin came to this particular site because they had an exact replica of our moon's surface with the craters and everything, from the lighting to whatnot, that was exactly like our moon. So if you were to fake a moon landing for the purpose of covering something up, this would be the place to do it. In fact, how many of you ever have heard the conspiracy on how it would have been Stanley Kubrick who was behind it? Isn't it interesting that he received this wonderful gift of the 70mm Hasselblad cameras as a gift from NASA that he used to film his 2001: A Space Odyssey? So I think we're starting to see an interesting connection there. According to my sources, when I dig around doing my research, I have some very knowledgeable sources. They tell me that up on Europa, the moon of Jupiter, that there are 25-foot wide whale-like creatures swimming around on the surface. And you're just finding out now that there's water up there. I'm going to make a little prediction for you. You're going to find a lot more out pretty soon. But if ETs are real, why don't they just land on the front steps of the White House? Why don't they just step up onto the stage and talk to us? Well, very good question. Perhaps we can get the answer if we go back to September 18th, 1997 in Moscow. There's a very interesting and intelligent man that is standing out on a balcony that night. I want you to all go back in time with me. He's standing on this balcony. And this intelligent man, his name is Kirshan Ilyumzhinov. He is the former president of Kalmykia, the southwestern province of Russia. This is the only Buddhist region in Russia. He's highly intelligent, okay? How intelligent is he? Well, he's almost as intelligent as our own Dr. Paul LaViolette. But he was a world chess champion, FIDE. Do you guys know who Garry Kasparov is? Kasparov beat Deep Blue. That was the supercomputer. This guy beat that guy. Okay, that's how smart he was. Very smart guy. He's on his balcony enjoying the stars. His staff, his servants are behind him. He steps out onto the side, just takes a deep breath, and all of a sudden this translucent tube comes down out of the heavens and starts to hover before him and lands on the balcony. Out steps these two extraterrestrials in yellow-like suits, and they take him aboard their ship and they pull him up there, and he's gone out to the stars, into the heavens, and they start revealing him the secrets about humanity. They say the reason we haven't come down and hung out with you guys and talked to you guys is because of how you treat your animals, how you treat each other. It's rather barbarous. We're afraid of you guys. You got some growing to do because we come here to grow and evolve. They also tell them, coincidentally, that they invented the game of chess. Like, we invented it. We gave it to the Persians. That's why, we picked you. So he was absolutely fascinated by this. And what I think is really interesting about that case is that it tells us that we are going to make contact more and more, that we have We have more to look at, we have more to do, we have more growing to do, which is very exciting. But you might say contact has already begun. How many of you have heard already from some of our contactees already at this conference? You've been listening to their messages of what they're saying. Well, when you make contact with extraterrestrials, there's things that happen to you physiologically. There are changes that happen in your body if you go off planet. Your circadian rhythms change. Okay? Your resonance changes. Your atomic structure would change. But most certainly your philosophies change. Your ideas change. And we see that over and over again. Dr. Michio Kaku has said 1 in 200 stars has habitable Earth-like planets surrounding it. In the galaxy, 500 million stars have Earth-like planets going around them. That's huge, 500 million. So when we look at the night sky, it makes sense that someone is looking back at us. Well, we most certainly know from the Kepler space mission that we've got over 40 billion with a B Earth-like planets. 10 billion of at least is habitable. They're out in the night sky. I mean, how narcissistic do we have to be to believe that we're the only ones? It's ridiculous. When you look up at the sky, they're looking back at us. Look, this is Nut, the Egyptian sky goddess of our Milky Way galaxy. Do you guys notice something really interesting that they were mapping out the stars, but do you notice that up there, there's these ships going between the stars? I think it's a rather interesting realization. In fact, when you look up at the sky and you see those 88 some odd constellations, we know it goes beyond that. The Egyptians were already mapping this out at the back of Hathor's temple in Dendara. This is one of the pieces. It's only a replica today. The other has been moved over to the Louvre in Paris. The Egyptians aren't too happy about that. But when I ask you guys about Egypt, when I say Egypt, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Okay, great. That's a good answer. Sometimes people say obelisks. They say sphinxes. But, okay, the Great Pyramid, since you guys called it. The Great Pyramid is an absolutely incredible structure. Mind-blowing. A polynomial, tetrahedral structure that by using trans-dimensional mathematics can be turned into a sphere. Look at all the concepts we can use with pi and frequency, Fibonacci sequences on these sacred sites. It's made of granite, limestone, sandstone. It's built like a Faraday cage. It conducts electromagnetic energy. It's built on the Giza Plateau, which is artificially leveled. It's absolutely magnificent. In fact, look at it. 13-acre span, 750 feet wide, 481 feet tall. Okay? 22.5 million stones. We're talking 70-ton bricks. You make one mistake, one error, and it's history. Weighs over 6 million tons. If you multiply 6 million tons by a factor of 100 million, you get the mass of the Earth. Astounding. Whoever built this was very sophisticated. These were not slaves. It was not intended to be a tomb. It may have been used at a tomb at times, but it was not intended to be a tomb and never was. This is Manly Palmer Hall. Okay, we've talked about him a lot at this conference so far. He's a great man. Okay, out of his little school in Los Feliz, California, the Philosophical Research Society. As we come out of the 20th century, he's one of the greatest masters that has ever walked amongst us. He wrote over 150 books, gave over 8,000 extemporaneous lectures and countless articles. The man was a living master. This is what he said about the Great Pyramid. He said, "Supreme among the wonders of antiquity, unrivaled by the achievements of later architects and builders, the Great Pyramid of Giza bears mute witness to an unknown civilization, which having completed its predestined span, passed into oblivion. Eloquent in its silence, inspiring in its majesty, divine in its simplicity, the Great Pyramid is indeed a sermon in stone. Its magnitude overwhelms the puny sensibilities of man. Among the shifting sands of time, it stands as a fitting emblem of eternity itself. Who were the illumined mathematicians who planned its parts and dimensions? The master craftsman who supervised its construction, the skilled artisan who trued its blocks of stone." A truer statement could never have been made about this magnificent edifice. 4,000 years later, though, we're back to the same language. Everybody's sending these on their phone these days. What went wrong? This is Charles Taze Russell. He's the founder of the Jehovah's Witness Church. Back in 1871, he had the International Watchtower Association, or the International Zionist Watchtower Association. Not only do you see that that is a replica of the Great Pyramid with a Templar Cross of Lorraine cross on the side of his pyramid in Pittsburgh, where he's buried, but what we see is that he was absolutely obsessed with Egypt. A lot of people don't know this when talking to the Jehovah's Witnesses, so maybe you can have a little bit of fun with them now. On their old literature, you see there's a sun disk. It's an Egyptian sun disk with the wings. When he went to Egypt, he saw the Great Pyramid and said, well, hey, I think it was built by the Hyksos people, these slaves that were God's chosen people, so they encoded a secret message into the subterranean chambers. And he used a chronology to say, okay, well, I think by measuring this, it means that Jesus is going to become king in 1914. And that's when the church was started. And as Jordan Maxwell would always joke around with me, he goes, what was Jesus doing the last 2,000 years? Sitting around having margaritas, doing nothing? But it's interesting because that's when their church was founded. 2 years later, unfortunately, because he had passed away, there's another man that gets assigned to the church. His name is Judge Joseph Rutherford. He comes into the picture and says, okay, pyramids are from the devil. All that stuff is gone. But he did imply that only 144,000 people could be saved and go to heaven, which is really interesting because he gets that from Revelation 7 and 14 in the Bible. Now, the interesting thing about that is that when you use gematria, you take 1 plus 4 plus 4, it equals 9. Okay, 9 is very significant because when you spend 9 months in the womb, this is the number of man. So the inside joke is everybody gets saved. But here's the other thing. 9 is very significant to the mysteries. There was 9 founding members of the Knights Templars. There's actually 9 sides of the pyramid. If you look at it right on the top, it's 2 times 4, 8 sides on the top, and 1 on the bottom. That's 9 sides. 9 pyramids on the Giza Plateau, 9 curses that followed along Howard Carter after opening the tomb of King Tutankhamun. So the number 9 is very significant to all of our mysteries. In 1798, Napoleon visited Egypt, and boy, did he ever visit it. You know, a lot of people will complain about Napoleon, but he actually did a lot of good for Egypt. He brought along with him savants. He brought along with him these great artists and people who depicted the great scenes of Egypt. But he said to himself, I'm going up into the Great Pyramid. I'm going to spend the night in there. I'm going to find out what that's all about. Well, when he spent the night in the Great Pyramid, he came out the next morning white as a ghost. Almost how I'll turn out in these pictures with that flash. But you know, the interesting part about this is that he didn't reveal this till his deathbed of what he actually saw. What he saw was his own Waterloo. He saw his life flashing before him. And this is not unlike the people that when we bring them up in our tours up into the Great Pyramid, they have out-of-body experiences. Consciousness starts shifting. It's an incredible, life-changing, transformative experience. And we get another story about this. Have any of you ever heard of Paul Brunton? Okay, if you've never heard of this man, make sure you order this book when you get home off of Amazon. It's very interesting. This book is called A Search in Secret Egypt. It's written in 1930. This man decides that, hey, I heard about Napoleon's experience. I'm going to go visit the Great Pyramid. I'm going to spend the night there, and I'm going to see what happens. He puts a little candle light up in the king's chamber next to the sarcophagus. He puts a candle right there and spends the night up in the Great Pyramid. Okay, let's see what happens. He said after a while he started to get very scared because these ghosts and apparitions started to appear to him. He said, okay, I want to run out of the pyramid right now. I've got to get out of here. But he decided to tough it out. He said after a while he couldn't resist anymore, that his etheric body was pulled out. It was just transferred his consciousness before him. He was astral projecting and he couldn't even fight it. He said these priests appeared to him and they took him down into a secret chamber in the Great Pyramid and they showed him halls of records and information in a whole other side of Egypt. There was a second type of Egypt, a world hidden to the naked eye. Very interesting. These are some depictions from Manly Palmer Hall, who was raised to a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemasonry as an honor because of his brilliance and his knowledge. What you'll see here up in the Great Pyramid, if you look up on the left, you'll see that there's sort of a mock crucifixion going on, a resurrection. You'll see that there's a transference of the ba when laying in the sarcophagus, like it's almost like working like a kind of transference technology for your consciousness. You see someone being raised up with this lion-headed god. It looks like Zervan from the Persian mysteries of Mithraism. But when we look over at the Great Pyramid, I'm sure many of you have heard of the idea that we have like a archaeoastronomy or an astroarchaeology. Have you ever heard of the Orion's Belt alignment over the Great Pyramid? Sure. Well, I've always found that fascinating because we find that alignment over other pyramidal structures. Many of you have heard the presentation by my friend Derek White Sky Cloud, who's the contactee. Were any of you there for his presentation? Yeah. Do you remember what he said? When the 9-foot-tall beings like Zael and everybody met with him in 2003, and they took him up in the ship, out into space, they passed through a portal or a Stargate in where? Orion's Belt, right? So I started thinking about that because in my studies with contactees and cases, I started to say, where else do we find connections to these portals opening up around Orion's Belt? Well, these two gentlemen are very controversial, to say the least, okay? Stan Romanek, who has that book, Messages, he has a very famous case. He was talking about how he saw extraterrestrials in the window, how he would wake up with these glowing lacerations and everything else. He was drawing these very complex equations in his sleep. The man has no mathematical background, and it's very mysterious how that all came up. Well, in this particular time, he drew this space cube, and what you see over there is we see this portal opening up over in Mintaka, in Orion's Belt. And it appears to go over to the Pleiades, sort of by the Tegetans, maybe Gaugia's people. They're all hanging out. And this very interesting diagram was posted online by a friend of mine who's a very serious researcher. And he was contacted privately by the late Henry Deacon, that was his name for the public, but his real name was Arthur Newman. He's no longer with us, but he was a physicist that was revealing a lot of interesting information about portals and stargates and such. He was very knowledgeable. He contacted him privately and said, I can't go on record with this, but he said there is a portal stargate system that we've known about in these programs that is up in Mintaka. And I found that rather interesting. But do we find any other evidence for highways and pathways and portals inside of our ufological literature? Okay, so if you go back to the book Behind the Flying Saucers, which is a classic that came out in the 1950s, it was written by Frank Scully. Any of you guys ever seen the X-Files? Yeah. This is where you get Mulder and Scully from. It's named after Frank Scully. He's just one of those iconic figures. He talked about magnetic highways. When you go back to Adamski's work with the Venusians inside the spaceships, this is his best book, by the way. In Adamski's work, he talks about these magnetic highways that our UFOs are traveling to get here. So I think that's really interesting. Do we have any evidence for that now in science? Well, this was recently in the news. We have Magellanic bridges that are connecting our neighboring galaxies. The large and small Magellanic clouds. It says these are streams of neutral gas. Dr. Paul LaViolette, who's with us, has a book out, Decoding the Message of the Pulsars. We might have another suggestion that pulsar stars are pulsing at certain frequencies like a superluminal galactic GPS system. Very interesting. So our entire skies are littered with these electromagnetic highways and pathways, which I find absolutely fascinating. But I don't think this subject is as easy as just saying we're having all physical contacts. I think we're having all sorts of contacts. There's intelligence at all sorts of areas that we're beginning to look. We know, thanks to this thing called the Wilkinson's Microwave Anisotropy Probe, or the WMAP scan for short, that's a lot easier to say, that we can take a radioactive background scan of our universe. And what we find up there is astounding, that we find these circuitous patterns, these ripple effect of patterns in the background radioactive area of our universe that shows our universe is replicating itself. I don't care what cosmological theory for today you want to use, whatever one's popular, Big Bang. replicate itself. Expansion, replicated itself. It's growing, it's expanding. What we know now is that we are just a little bubble in a vast ocean full of universes, and they're all connected. All right? It's very, very interesting. In fact, we know if we use a powerful enough laser, we can tear the fabric of space-time, inject it full of nanobots, and go through to the other side. That's what our theoretical physicists are telling us. But you might say that every moment you're witnessing the birth and death of universes. You're impregnating reality with your thoughts. Every second you're shifting to a parallel universe. This is no different than the mitosis in your body. You know, every day, up to 50 trillion cells are dying and being regenerated in your body. That's over 300 billion a minute. This is the rising of the phoenix from the ashes. This is the great dance of Shiva, the destroyer, destroying and recreating worlds at every moment. This is the great regeneration of the mother octopus that gives her young octopi her body in the great simpatico of life. You're witnessing that at every moment. So what is reality? This reality in front of you right now is a series of neurological and physiological discharges. What that means is that it's coming through you differently than every person in this room. Okay? You have a unique neurophysiology and biodiversity. It means each of you has a different vehicle of perception. As you're looking up at this stage, we might say, hey, you know, you're looking up at me, there's a certain amount of light coming through the photoreceptors in your eyes. They're only coming at a very narrow band of frequency, 390 to 750 nanometers. You're decoding them. They're coming up through the rods and cones in your eyes, up your optic nerve, and being decoded through 2 visual cortices. It's a very interesting perception. We know that we are living in this holofractal, multi-dimensional multiverse, meaning that the subatomic particles are acting like a hologram. People have said we live in a simulation. Well, they're not too far off. A lot of you may have heard people talking about dimensions. Dimensions are subjective. You know, there's no such thing as a higher dimension or a lower dimension. If you and I are in the same room, I walk to the other side of the room, I'm in another side of that dimension. So we are constantly interacting with these things all the time. But that gets us asking more questions about our Earth and how things work. Have you guys seen this new image of our sun that we captured? This was with a $344 million telescope out of Maui. It looks like we got these little kernels of caramelized popcorn, doesn't it? Okay, so this is plasma, size of France. We've had a lot of guys ask questions about our sun. Could it be a portal? Could it be connected to all the other stars through this plasmic web? And what is plasma? These ionically charged clouds of gas with protons, electrons, and neutrons. Are they all talking to each other? We know our Earth talks to the sun constantly. And this is changing everything that's going on down here on Earth with our spatial coordinates, with our weather. I know Bob over there is always watching Suspicious Observer on the 2-minute news. I know a lot of you have seen that guy, constantly tracking what's going on with our star. But our star is also affecting something around our field that Rupert Sheldrake calls the morphogenetic field. This is an electromagnetic field around the Earth that holds the building blocks of all life, that's shaping and molding life around our planet. There's some people out there like Bert Hellinger that made something called family constellation therapy, where they're doing counseling modalities that tap into this intelligent field of information to heal you, to heal your genetics. In fact, what we believe is that it might be communicating directly with your DNA. What is DNA? Your DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. It has 64 codons. Some of those are redundant codons. In fact, it's so well designed, it looks like an intelligent designer was behind it, that even guys like Richard Dawkins, the staunch atheist, he's now said that he believes extraterrestrials are behind it. You should put him on Ancient Aliens. It communicates with RNA, ribonucleic acid. There's an intelligent conversation going on there, and we have also proteins and amino acids that are being exchanged. But why I think that's fascinating is that according to Dr. Bruce Lipton in his epigenetics theories, he believes that your DNA is an antenna. It's receiving the information from somewhere. Did you guys see this on NBC News? The Pentagon has warned us not to give up it's warning military persons anyways, not to give up your DNA over to sites like 23andMe. Did anybody see that in the news? Did you read what it said in the article? The main threat in there is mass surveillance and the ability to track individuals without their authorization or awareness. So if your DNA is an antenna, I don't know if any of you guys remember in the old cell phone days that people could clone your cell phone. If they had your electronic serial number, if they cloned your cell phone, they could eavesdrop in on your conversations. Could it be that our DNA operates the same way? Well, we're told now by the famed British physicist, Sir Roger Penrose, who's worked over with Professor Stuart Hameroff, not too far from here, at the University of Tucson in Arizona. He's worked with anesthesiology. They have a theory called or quantum consciousness, where they have looked at your brain and you have these incredible little things called microtubules. They're so well designed as computational devices that they work with your consciousness through something called anharmic vibrations. Now, what are anharmic vibrations? You guys know Indian music with the sitars and everything? That's anharmic vibrations. Now we're confirming this. What did those ancient people know over there? Really? Could it be why, our famous physicists, Niels Bohr, Erwin Schrödinger, Nikola Tesla, they all became Vedists. Look at Oppenheimer. Look at them. They all studied the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita and everything else. Even our great thinkers, Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson. But we know that your consciousness is held together through something called superpositioning or quantum cohesion. You have an IP address. One day that's going to be a part of your quantum communication. It already is. But it's fascinating because this is what we use now to study near-death experiences. Your consciousness has a non-locality to it. This is a vehicle. This is a cockpit. It's not where your consciousness is stored. So the reason I'm explaining this to you is because there's a number of ways that you're interacting with our visitors, and our visitors are interacting with us. Reality is not what you've been told or what you think it is. So going back to what I told you at the beginning, we're going to be listening to what our contactees have said. This is a rather interesting lady. Her name is Ashiana Dean. Okay, she wrote a series of books called Angelic Realities, the Voyager series. She starts talking about different types of atoms or particles, and she says they have a different state that we don't understand. She says they have a part of chi, a part of k, and a part of cum. She says, you guys have this binary idea about your universe that you have light and dark matter. She says, well, I believe there is a trinary state. There's another type of universe that works in conjunction with your universe, which is really interesting, like an invisible or a void of your universe, an antimatter universe. She says that when you align these up using something called angular momentum, this is like the axial rotation of the Earth, that this spins in and out of different dimensions, and there's different things that happen. And she says this is dependent on different types of DNA and DNA strands. She says that life on our Earth was seeded by beings that were much more intelligent at certain time, with terraforming and everything else. And she says that they hijacked the signal on our morphogenetic field I was telling you about, this broadcasting the signal for our genetics. She says basically they use concurrent signals from the multiverse, different spatial coordinates to send it to Earth, and it seeded life here, that these people had a very advanced science. She said we have 5 harmonic universes. We have the absolutum, or the multiverse, and there's something called a unisci, which is a central core. Have we heard anything like this before? You guys know the Billy Meyer case? Okay. Well, remember back in 1953, after Spoth had left the picture? Asket comes into the picture, right? She takes Billy, when he's in India, it says to him, you live in the Dern universe. We're from the doll or the antimatter universe. This is like the, if you've ever watched Seinfeld, it's the bizarro world, Jerry. It's like that, that different reality that's like the mirror, the opposite of our world. I know when I've studied cases with our great near-death experience stories, or even Garnet Schulhauser over there in his fabulous books, he talks about going into the void. Do you remember that, Garnet? And when you go into the void, as you can read about in Dr. Annie Kagan's incredible book, The Afterlife of Billy Fingers, she says that you have to go to this void to shed the soul vehicle that you have, which does not interrupt the spark of you, the individual spark that we colloquially call a spirit. That stays intact, but you dissolve that and become part of this oneness before going into another universe and getting another soul-like vehicle assigned to you, which is interesting. In the Egyptian ideas, we have this as well. You have 7 main bodies, but the 3 we focus on for the Egyptian is your Ba, which is like your etheric body. It's portrayed as that bird that you leave the body at night. You have a ka and an ak. A ka is like this field of light or energy around you. The ak is your spark. Ashiana goes on later to say in her books, and this is an exact look at what it looks like to open up her book there. She mentions that there's these stargates around our Earth. We have these places of our Earth that perhaps open up these electromagnetic pathways or highways, but they only work for people with the correctly activated DNA. That your DNA has to be perceiving them at these points, but you are more sensitive to these realities. And I know it's a little hard to see the one on the side, but she talks about places like Cairo, with Giza in Egypt. She talks about places like Moscow, Lake Titicaca, China, and other places. But have we heard anything like this in our physics? It's one thing for contactees to say stuff, but people always want our physics to catch up and talk about it. Well, Nassim Haramein has been talking a lot about this angular momentum spin. He says, what the hell makes these things spin? What's making our atoms be in constant motion and spin? Why in our Eastern theology do we talk about the spinning of chakras? Why are we talking about toroidal fields around the Earth? DNA spinning in that mode. Nassim Haramein's been asking that continuously if you look at his work. Could this be that when you walk into a room you notice a ghost or a spirit? That it's a neutrino light source brushing up against the fabric of space-time? Could this be how the stories of our Bigfoot work? You know, where I'm from, we talk about the Sasquatch. Our First Nations, indigenous people take it very seriously. It's not just Bigfoot hunters with night vision goggles hiding in the bushes with a bag of Cheetos in their underwear looking for them. These are very serious cases. They say they disappear and reappear. Could George Lucas have known more when he put a Bigfoot in a flying spaceship? Said maybe they left someone behind? But the ancients knew a lot about energy. I'm telling you that right now. If you go back to the stories of the great Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, one of the great feminists that we see that came out of the 19th century, she was traveling all around the world by horseback, riding sideways, smoking a cigarette, doing things, dressed up as a man at a time when it wasn't popular to do so. She's going to Egypt. She was going all over the East, writing about it as a theosophist. She learns about an ancient energy in our universe called Fohat, and it moved like a serpent, like this, throughout the universe, gathering up debris, forming planets. Did we hear that in our sciences? Of course we do. What we know now is that how you have the formation of rocky planets is that you get an embryonic mass that forms from the plasma of stars. Thanks to a centripetal and centrifugal force, you wind up pushing and a pulling, a friction, a radioactive decay, and it gathers moisture inside the Earth. That's why there's more water inside of our Earth than there is on the surface. We have an underwater mantle, and it's building pressure. And believe me, if that thing builds too much pressure, we're in trouble. You know, the flood stories of the biblical days talk about the water coming from inside the Earth and moving upwards. But you know what's interesting about this? Maybe you guys have heard of inner Earth civilizations. That through this process, it forms a honeycomb of inner Earth-like pockets. And we're going to talk about that today, of why that's very interesting. You might say that every rocky planet has naturally been formed with these inner Earth sort of cavities of where you could travel to. And these serpentine mysteries we're talking about, you find everywhere. They're absolutely ubiquitous. A lot of people think it's about serpent worship. That's just nonsense. That's superstition and ignorance. To the ancients, they personified things into the mysteries. We have three types of energy in our universe. You have a type of geomagnetic energy you find with ley lines, vortexes, and vortices. Dr. Ivan Sanderson documented this back in 1972 with vortices and biovortices, highly energetic sites of this Earth. You have a type of bioelectrical energy, what we call kundalini. Hence why you see that symbol up there on the side of your ambulance. That's the caduceus of Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus. This is why there's 33 degrees in Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Symbolically, it's talking about the raising of that energy that's moving up and it's coming out the left and right hemisphere of your brain to equilibrium and mounting out of the pineal gland as an awakened bioelectrical energy, and we can now photograph that. They're called biophotons. You have a type of universal energy. To the German secret societies, they understood it as Vril. Nikola Tesla called it scalar. Now we call it zero-point energy. And believe me, we already know how to tap into it. In the Bible, we talked about winged serpent gods, or winged serpents. They were called the seraphim. And a lot of people are traditionists. They want to say, okay, we have the cherubs, we have the different types of angels, but actually look up the Hebrew. You'll find that seraphim means winged serpent. And if you see that photograph I have up there, that photograph I took on the ceiling of Hathor's temple in Dendara, and you'll notice the winged serpent gods that are gifting knowledge to humanity, traveling from the far left in the boats from the stars. You find that there's the Naga serpent that had 7 heads over in Asia. We find that we also look back to our Druids. They were worshiping a serpent god called Hu Gadarn. We call him Hu for short, just like Cernunnos. And he looks just like Krishna or Shiva. But the interesting thing is that's where you get Hu man from. This goes back a long ways. We have a serpentine migration path on this planet. Even in the book of Genesis, go back and read your Bible. It says the tribe of Dan traveled along the path of the serpent with the adder biting at their feet. This is an interesting thing. We're talking about geomagnetic lines, areas of great energy. Go over to Chichen Itza, Quetzalcoatl's area. Bob, you live out there. Okay, you go over to this area in the Yucatan, you'll find that not only are there 9 steps, by the way, on this pyramid. We could do a whole lecture on that. But there are serpents everywhere with Kukulkan, the Serpentine Masters. My friend Muhammad Ibrahim, who is here, he'll show you that next to these sites we get something called the thorny plant that grows. The great transcendentalist Eliphas Levi wrote that even to the Druids, they used the hawthorn as a magnetic plant. We find that this serpentine energy grows all around these sites, with the thorny plant growing around all the most powerful temples, all the most powerful sites. When you go out to these places like Stonehenge, the Salisbury Plain, we could talk all about the different types of stones there. But we find that it's built on a very energetic area, and it moves in a circuitous pattern. Isn't it interesting that when we look at these patterns, that this moving in a circle is always very significant? We have seance circles, UFO contact circles. We have, ET contactee circles from Dr. Stephen Greer called C-SETI. Why are people in healing circles in these places always moving in a circle? There's that energy that's moving back into itself. It's like it's opening up a wormhole. Okay, in that area where Stonehenge is built, do you know what's really fascinating is we actually find a great collection of elongated skulls, by the way. That's what's in those burial mounds. So it gives us clues about who's behind this design. All up in that area, we have these circuitous patterns. In fact, this is Avebury nearby Stonehenge, and it's even more impressive. In fact, all up that area, we have 900 megalithic henges in this circuitous pattern that move all the way up into Naphtali in Egypt. And when I talked to my friend David Halpin over in Ireland, up at Baltycarrigan Hill and Baltinglass Hill, near Wicklow in Ireland, we found an exact replica of Naphtali up in those hills. Not only are they astrologically mapping out the stars, but they're on points of great energy for great contact, and so much more going on. But what else do we find at these sites? What is everybody missing? People are missing something very important. And I know, Joe Garbon, this is an area that you're well familiar with. When we take pyramids, when we take these structures, what are most of them built in? Does anybody know? Granite. What's granite made out of? Right? Silica. And out of silica, we get what? Silicone, like silicone microchips, which is a great insulator and conductor of electromagnetic energy, like piezoelectrical energy that you talked about with quartz. Okay? So we know that even when we see obelisks, the great obelisk structures that we even find today in our modern world, in areas like Westminster and London, Paris, New York, places, they're like acupuncture points on the planet. Okay? A lot of people don't know this, but actually Big Ben and the Eiffel Tower, designed by Mr. Eiffel, are actually replicating obelisks. When you look over at the Great Pyramid now, we have studies to say that the Great Pyramid of Giza can conduct and direct electromagnetic energy. When Walt Disney, who I believe was a great man, when he opened up the doors of Disneyland on July 17th, 1955, at 1313 South Harbor Boulevard, and again, that's an important number, Walt was fascinated by the Rosicrucian mysteries. He was involved in D-Malays, a Masonic order. 1313, if we have any Masons in the crowd, in a Masonic cipher is MM, Mickey Mouse, our Master Mason. When he built Disneyland, he built it in a very particular way. In fact, he was giving a nod to the mysteries. If you go over into Frontierland and Adventureland, there's a Club 33 that was originally designated for 33rd degree Masons. The Masonic Club entrance used to be in the Pirates of the Caribbean. What's interesting is that when he built Disneyland, a lot of you don't know this, is he contracted out 2 guys from SRI, Stanford Research Institute. This is the group that was exploring remote viewing. We had Dr. Hal Puthoff, Uri Geller, Ingo Swann, Pat Price. These guys were the guys later on that worked with SRI. When he was working with these guys, they designed Disneyland for him. Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood and Buzz Price. Buzz and Woody. Sound familiar? Toy Story, right? They used this ancient knowledge of electromagnetic energy on our planet to build Disneyland. They put it on the 33rd parallel. And they put the castle right in the middle where the influx of that energy is. And behind the castle, they put the carousel there to act as a Tesla coil to spin the energy out into the park. This is well documented in Walter Bosley's book, Keys to the Kingdom. You notice that the obelisks all around the park, they're there to denote the fact that this is a place of great energy. This is just like Area 51, also on the 33rd parallel. A lot of people don't know all the stuff that was going on with sex magic there before this was built with Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard from Scientology. This place, S4, Dreamland, Area 51 that we call it. Very interesting place. We learned about it from Bob Lazar. He went there with Gene Huff, John Lear. Told us about all kinds of things there. But when I've gone there, I took some very interesting trips with Jordan Maxwell, which I'll tell you about. This is my sister in the back I told you about. We're talking about all kinds of fascinating things. She says, I don't give a damn about that. She put some earphones on. She's probably listening to Justin Bieber. And as Canadians, we apologize for him. But up there, it's interesting. When I first met Jordan many years ago, he said to me, I said, Jordan, how did you get involved in all this? You know, secret societies, hidden symbolism, everything. He said, I'm so grateful to my ex-wife for introducing me to religion. Before her, I didn't know what hell was. So, we go on a road trip. We head out to that little place called Rachel, Nevada. We've taken a lot of fun road trips. He's so much fun to travel with. He's got noisemakers. He's always got interesting facts. We go to this little place called the Little Alien Inn. And of course, when you go there, there's pictures of all the people on the wall that have visited there, that have said significant things and interesting lectures. Jordan always likes me to point out that his picture is the biggest picture on the wall. And many of you might have heard him and Paul Tice talking about their experience they had there. They're being interviewed by Anthony Hilder, and you can go look up the video for this called Alien 51, where they did see some UFOs with their friend Ivy White. But what's interesting is that when I go there, Jordan would always tell me interesting facts that he heard when he would hang out there with guys that were from Area 51 on their lunch break and places like that. They would tell him stuff like, did you know there is no Area 52, Area 53, that the name Area 51 comes from the distress signal in the Navy, Mayday, 0501. And of course, as you know, the founding of the Bavarian Illuminati by Adam Weishaupt was on May 1st, 1776, which is rather interesting. But he'd say, you know, Johnny, that's not really that interesting. You know, I was so excited there because the pie was so good and the coffee was pretty good. But he says, you need to get out of this place and cross the road. When you cross the road, I'd say, why? He'd say, put your ear up to the telephone pole. I'd put my ear up to the telephone pole. I'd hear this rustling and this bustling of what sounded like trains going on under the ground in this place where there's nothing else around. That's because it's all underground. So even if you go and storm Area 51, you're not getting anything. But lots of civilizations have had this. Okay, this is Cappadocia in Turkey. We know they went underground. We find that over where the Oracle of Delphi is, where, by the way, you had a hydrant or a serpent that would come up. We find that was underground. Angkor Wat Temple in Cambodia, where the serpentine rulers would come up from underground. We find the passageways used by the Knights Templars, or by Scotland, underground in many different places. We find that there's Agartha, that the Germans believed with. It was an underground mapping of our world. Shambhala to the Asians. We have deep underground military bases. These are in the Osiris shafts, where we just took a group into in Egypt. The whole of the Giza Plateau, which is artificially leveled, is literally crawling with these underground passageways. And when you go to the Denver airport, which I have to fly into when I go to Gaia, this place is crawling with the mythology. It's written right there on the wall in the art that they have an apocalyptic, eschatological scene that they're telling you we have underground areas under our airport. What the hell is going on? Elon Musk is telling us, he's saying, hey, you know what? I want to send all kinds of people up to Mars by 2025. He wants to, go way beyond that in 2050. We're talking millions of people. But maybe we get answers for what that is if we go back to Egypt, where I spend a lot of time. This is over in a temple called Edfu. Edfu is a very interesting place. The dynastic Egyptians filled it full of hieroglyphics. It looks like it was built for giants dedicated to Horus. But when Muhammad and I have been up there, we found something very interesting. The entire Atlantis story is on the wall. A lot of people think the Atlantis story is a Greek story, but it's not. We get the story from Plato, of course, right? In the Timaeus. Plato learns the story from his uncle Critias. Critias learns it from his great-great-great-grandfather Solon, who lived 200 years prior to him at the year 600 BCE. He travels over to Egypt when it's called Sais. He goes there and meets with a priest named Sanchis, and they're at the Temple of Nefru on the Nile Delta, which is now swept away. But we believe the exact replica of that story is on this wall. He tells them, you know what, Plato? You guys think you're so knowledgeable because you know about this flood story. That was 12,000 years ago. We all think that there was a flood story from the Chinese, and the Hindu had a flood story, right? Well, there's been many civilizations that have been wiped off by fire, by water, by cataclysms. Get used to it, Plato. This has been happening a long time. The last one we knew about was called Atlantis, and it was 9,000 years ago. That's about 11,600 years ago, around 12,000 years ago, where we believe today there was something called the Younger Dryas Cataclysm, or Great Destruction on this earth. It's very interesting because when you look above this area where we see a great seafaring people from the origins of the gods in Egypt, there's a serpent portrayed coming down from the top of the temple. Some people will say that's an asteroid. Some people will say we've had fire and destruction from that, or maybe some kind of lightning bolt from the gods. But we know the serpent in the mysteries is always energy. So something went wrong. I believe, based on what we see, that the Egyptians were experimenting with electromagnetic energy and gravity. And I think the experiments went wrong. And it may have happened more than once. This was not just them. It was a part of a greater civilization that we'd call Atlantis. I don't believe Atlantis was just one little area out in the Atlantic Ridge. Okay? A lot of people believe Atlantis was just out there where we'd see the Azores and the Canary Islands would be like the mountain peaks. The Rock of Gibraltar would be the Pillars of Hercules. Some people have suggested is it the Eye of Africa or Mauritania. Too small. I believe, based on the fact that we see pyramids all over the world, we have the Great Pyramid of Egypt, the pyramids in the Yucatan, the pyramids over in Tikal in Guatemala, 140 pyramids in the Azorean Islands, pyramids over in China. They're everywhere. This was a great global dissemination of culture, a continental diffusion. We know that the Sahara was once lush and green, okay? We know that it was vastly different than what we see today, and this is the same as when we go into places like the Gobi Desert. If you go out into the Gobi Desert, between the Gobi and the Sahara, you're going to find so much advanced technology in the next few years. That's just a little tip I'm going to give you, leading up into Beijing. You're going to find a lot of stuff there. We know the Earth was different 50,000 years ago, everyone. There was more oxygen here. There was less gravity. If you were to bring the dinosaurs back today, they would not survive. The world was a much bigger place. We're thinking way too small. Look at how your Earth looks like it fits together like puzzle pieces. There is a lost history we have, a prehistoric history that we've not made contact with. You ever wonder about all these strange mysteries connected to mountains? Maybe the Earth was such a destroyed place at one point. Remember how Charles Hall was talking about how the tall whites were saying how it would be too dangerous to take a ship in between our moon at certain points because of gravity? People say maybe asteroids destroy us. Maybe it was all the above. Think about if things were changing in our gravity. Think if things were changing on our planet. Think about what we're doing with HAARP in the ionosphere. We hear about Noah being up in Mount Ararat. Christian scholars have often said that. The Armenians. Why would they go up into the mountains? Well, if we go up into Lake Titicaca in Peru, which is 12,500 feet above sea level, we see that there are fossilized seashells up there, seahorses. It's a very interesting place. The Andes are relatively new mountains. How do these people get up there so quickly and build walls around the place? We got to start asking these questions. In fact, when I've been up there with Wilco, the medicine man, with Brian Forrester and I, he told me, just like the locals did, UFOs come up out of Lake Titicaca. They have said there's a UFO base under there. There's all kinds of activity. These are the Ural Mountains. It's where the ancient Hungarian people and others believe they come from. And we could do a whole fascinating lecture about the secrets out of Hungary, believe me. But in this area, you look up in the mountains, you find something called the Dashka Stone. This is a 1 megaton relief. There's a 120 million year old fossilized shell in there. There's a 3D topographical map of the Earth that's visible 30 miles up from space. It's an ancient guidance system that you could use from space to navigate the Earth. This would have been at a time when there was only a primitive Pacific, the Atlantic was only a reservoir, and the Mediterranean was just a pond. These 3 river systems have now sunken down into the Earth. We can confirm they're there. This is just like the rivers that we find in the story of Jason and the Argonauts. It was a navigational system. What's even more astounding is that this has not only been confirmed by NASA, but it is also part of a 30-ton relief. There are petroglyphs up there older than the Nazca lines. The Russians found in this area little nanogold wires and microchip-like structures that are at the minimum of 20,000 years. We also found what looks like the remains of, well, some have said giants in the area, but we know that we find in the northern Black Sea, Crimea, and Scandinavia, the highest concentration of really true elongated skulls like the ones you find in Paracas. Now, what's really interesting is that this is Brian Forrester and I walking over Karnak. And what he's done over there is really interesting is he's actually looked at the cataclysmic destruction where we believed our Earth shifted 23.5 degrees, and he's measured the areas from the pre-cataclysmic areas of the temples to be 23.5 degrees off of your cardinal directions of northeast, south, and west. It's very interesting. This is a quote from Diodorus of Sicily in 50 BCE in the Bibliotheca Historica, or the Library of History. He says, the Egyptians were strangers who in remote times settled on the banks of the Nile, bringing with them the civilization of their mother country, could it be Atlantis? The art of writing and a polished language. They had come from the direction of the setting sun, the far west, and were the most ancient of men. So what we're saying here is the Egyptians that came in and later became the dynastics, they found Egypt. They found the pyramids. You have to look at Egypt like the layers of an onion, okay? Everybody's been in Egypt. Everyone wants to claim Egypt and say, it's my Egypt. Everyone's been there, okay? Today you have the Islamic or the Arabic layer. Peel back the layer. You go to a Jewish layer. Peel back the layer. A Coptic layer. A Roman layer. A Greek layer with the Macedonian conqueror Alexander the Great and the Ptolemaic kings. Peel that back. When we go back, we got Persians. Peel that back, we go back into a very interesting period, the dynastic Egyptians. Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, Upper and Lower Egypt. But if you go back further, we find these people called the pre-dynastic Egyptians. Remember this from Muhammad's presentation? The pre-dynastics were drawing the 3 pyramids on them that you find in the Giza Plateau. They were building out of mud and brick. They were rubbing sticks together. They were a very primitive people. They didn't know what they were doing. They were figuring stuff out again. This is a very interesting process. But before then, we had something called the pre-cataclysmic Egyptians. Now that's where it gets really interesting because there's no hieroglyphics on anything they build, and everything's built out of granite. It's absolutely magnificent and astounding. If you ever go inside of the Great Pyramid, you'll see that you find this granite that's been trued together so well. It's flawless. It's perfect in every way. These people were magnificent what they understood. We have all kinds of ancient records of gods, pre-cataclysmic gods that came here. Here you see me pointing at a relief from the Assyrians, or you go to the Akkadians. We have these winged gods coming here helping us. Why is Isis always portrayed with wings? This is like our angel iconography. It denotes these folks that were coming from higher places. Even in the Sumerian kings list, it said after the flood had swept the land, kingship had descended from heaven for a second time. When I've been walking out in the desert with Jordan Maxwell many years ago, he said, Johnny, do you see that's the second brightest star in the sky, or that bright star over there? He'd say, that's Sirius, the dog star. And he'd say to me, you know, that's why we call each other sir, the gentlemanly title. He said if you go back to the Middle Ages, it was a kingly title called Sire. And if you go back further to that, it was Sirius. And if we go back where that's from, it was Osiris. Walt Disney put all sorts of little wonderful things into his stories. You ever notice in Peter Pan why they're going to the second brightest star? If you look in Freemasonry, look at the blazing star of Freemasonry. It's Sirius. What are they telling you where their traditions come from? If you go into Egypt near Saqqara, you go out to Abu Sir near Abu Ghraib. Abu Sir is the land of Bu-Wizir. It's the land of Osiris. When I've been there with Stephen Mailer, he and I were talking, and he said, go look at my book, The Land of Osiris. My teacher, he says to me, the great Dr. Hakim Ayawan, Abdel Hakim Ayawan, he would tell him this is where the beings from Sirius would land and have meetings. We find an interesting place. My friend John T. Long is laying down up there in a spot that used to be where they say a crystal obelisk was. We get this very interesting lineup of the gods of Egypt. Who were the gods of Egypt? Well, according to Plutarch, he said the gods of ancient Egypt were the antediluvian, pre-cataclysmic kings who were deified or made into gods after death. So who the hell were they? If you'll go look into Egyptian mythology, we learn about guys like Ptah, the progenitor god of Egypt, and we see a lot of similarities there to the Oscars. But we see Osiris. He was a giant with an elongated head. You see me standing next to this sarcophagus? It says next to it, if you look at it very closely, it says enormous coffin, 15 to 20 foot coffins. Where are the bodies? I don't know, maybe in the basement. Do we have other stories about giants in Egypt? Of course we do. They're all over hieroglyphics and legends. This is the Caliph al-Mamun. We know about how there's a story about what we call the robber's entrance to the pyramid, if you see that entrance today. Because, of course, in ancient times, the pyramid was flawless on the outside. It was shining bright white in the sun. It would be blinding for you to look at the pyramid. There was no entrances. It was underground. Only the masters and the initiates of the mystery schools could enter. But this caliph had heard the stories from 1001 Nights that there was these giants called the El Shaddai, and they built the pyramids, and beneath the pyramids, they had hid a great treasure there guarded by jinn and monsters. But the giants built the pyramid according to the story. So the story goes is that the servants of him who were loyal and faithful to the caliph, they went there and they found the entrance. We believe the entrance was already known in Greek times, though, that they got the entrance. Here we have some tall whites. A lot of people have asked, are they angels? Are they demons? Are they extraterrestrials? We have a lot of great Christian authors out these days. You know, you've had your L.A. Marzulis, your Tom Horns, those type of people discussing what is the nature of extraterrestrials? Are they spirits? What are they? Well, we look at the word angel, comes from the Greek angelos, meaning messenger. I think maybe sometimes we've confused the two. After reading Garnett's books, I'm pretty convinced that they're separate beings. But sometimes we've confused them, all right? It's interesting, in the book of Hebrews in the Bible, it says in 13:2, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Or in the case of Lawrence Noble, maybe that's true. Okay? But what does it say about giants in there? We know if we go into the book of Enoch and Watchers 6, 7 through 8, it says that these watchers came down and they saw the daughters of man and they laid with them and produced an offspring of giants. It goes on further to say, if you go into this passageway over here, that this is where we learned a lot of our skills. Agriculture, everything else came from these beings. Guys like John Dee were trying to communicate with them. It says in the book of Numbers in the Bible that we appeared like grasshoppers to them at times, which is interesting. We have all sorts of depictions in Egypt of people with elongated heads. And believe me, we could do a whole lecture about elongated heads, and we would be here for another 2 hours. So I tried to cut that out because you guys have heard quite a bit already from our friends Brian Forrester and Brad Olson, which did a fabulous job. Karen Hoods, who was a World Bank insider, she said some very interesting comments. Very interesting comment. She said there is a second species on this planet with elongated skulls, and they are living under the Vatican in the libraries. Interesting comment to make. Believe me, and I've tried to find out information about her, from people in those fields, legal field and whatnot, and they've told me that there's gag orders on talking about her. She's disappeared off the map. And, you know, when I've had conversations with the great Danny Sheehan, he's told me, he said, yeah, he's been to the Vatican. He's a Jesuit lawyer, and I was asking about the Church of the Jesu and everything, because I've been to the Vatican too, and he said, yes, they have a knowledge of extraterrestrials at the Vatican. They're very well informed about the subject, and I believe that they are involved in somewhat of a disclosure. But where might these giants be buried? Okay? We could talk about forever conspiracies going back to the 1900s from the Smithsonian trying to cover this up. The Zuni and the Hopi have knowledge of them, believe me. We've heard about the Chocolate Mountains of Ecuador. One place I was told that you'll find the remains of giants are in the salt flats of Peru, which are millions of years old. But when we look around the world, we start to see all kinds of mysteries. Talk about ancient energy pathways and highways and doorways and portals and things around our earth. Have you guys ever seen these depictions of false doors? Have any of you ever seen these? Okay, some of you have. Definitely in your travels. Over in Pumapunku, over in Petra in Jordan, Ethiopia, Turkey, Bolivia, Egypt for sure. We see these doors that seem to go nowhere. Well, when you go up into this area called Amaru Maru, you find a very interesting doorway there. Looks like a keyhole that goes into the mountain. Notice what it's named, Amaru Maru. Did you know this is where America really gets her name from? Amaruca, land of the plumed serpent. It's according to the great Masonic historian, Manly Palmer Hall. You know what? No serpents can survive up there at that elevation. It's named after the serpentine energy. People have talked about going through this door, seeing things. We have a mythology connected to ancient Lemuria where they claim that a sun disk was brought there and later thrust into Lake Titicaca. All kinds of sightings come out of there. This is Pumapunku up in Bolivia. And when I've been there with Brian Forster, where our group just was, right, Bob? We were just out there. It's a fascinating place and is connected to this mystery of these doors. What I think is also interesting that people fail to mention is if you look over here, here's Brian. He's on one of these H blocks, the famous H blocks that we've seen, okay? What's interesting about that? Well, when you look at the finished H blocks, they don't have much of an electromagnetic interference. When you go to the unfinished one, it gives off an interference. It starts messing with your compass. Could this electromagnetism be how they were charging and moving these blocks? Do we get a hint of some sort of anti-gravitics or some sort of devices that they were using? I think so. But if you look very carefully, I want you to look carefully. Do you see in the middle of the block, it looks like the symbol for a false door? It looks like little doorways when we reassemble it. On the stones, we see vitrification. This would have to be done by extremely hot temperatures, like plasma. Something came through and destroyed them. We see the same thing over in Tiwanaku. In Tiwanaku, what's really interesting about this, where we might have a doorway system that's leading to other places for beings that could be visiting us. When I was there with Brian's wife, Erini, she said, Johnny, come down here. I want to show you something. Come look on the walls. You see the faces for all the people on Earth that have been visiting for a very long time. She says, do you notice there's the face of extraterrestrials? You see behind me how that face looks like it has protruding eyes? And she says, there's beings that have been coming here for some time. We further see evidence of this when we look around. That one looks very ET-like the grays. But what's interesting from these portals, these doorways, these lentils, they seem to be going somewhere. See, we see this iconography, this symbol of a false doorway used again and again. And there's Brian getting a suntan on the other side of the sun disk. But we get other interesting stories. This one comes from Jordan Maxwell. Have you guys ever heard of Nick Nocerino? Nick Nocerino, he was the foremost authority on crystal skulls, the Mitchell Hedges skull and everything else that we see. He got started in this because back in the 80s, he was having a conversation with Jordan Maxwell to say that he was out stationed with the military in southern France. Okay? So when he was in southern France, he was asked by a fellow he knew that was involved in esoteric, occult things and secret societies, Masonic orders. He says, why don't you come out to a meeting we're having at the Rennes-le-Château? The Rennes-le-Château is very famous for being the Templar hideout for the Knights Templars. You know, before Jacques de Molay was persecuted on Friday the 13th, 1307. Hence why the number 13 is sacred to the Masonic order. But he was in there, and he went to this place, and they were doing a ritual with the crystal skull. And they had a lecture saying these crystal skulls, there were several of them, they're communication devices for otherworldly beings, which is interesting, right? And he says, underneath this site, there's a Stargate. Incredible. He said the Templars had very specific locations, like Laughlin Chapel near Edinburgh in Scotland, where they could use these systems. So what do we find? If we actually look in York Rite Freemasonry, York Rite is Templar Masonry, hence the Templar symbology you see at the top. Most Masons, by the way, don't accuse them of walking through Stargates, because they're not. Most don't even appreciate the rich history of allegorical truths and beautiful symbolism they've inherited from the mysteries. You need a classical education of the seven liberal arts and sciences, like the trivium, to even decode these symbols. There's 3 degrees that you find in here, and it's very interesting. They're called the Royal Arch degrees. Okay? The Royal Arch, this is why the founder of McDonald's used the golden arches, why you find the arch in St. Louis. It's the rising horizon of the sun, a sun gate, a stargate. Here's the symbology. It's just like the Sumerian sun gate. These are the processes of initiation and changes. Any of you ever seen the Indiana Jones movie with the crystal skull one? Wonder where he got the idea. Jordan Maxwell hanging out with Michael Eisner, George Lucas, and folks talking about crystal skulls. The Templars had a lot of ideas about science that we don't even know. Did you know the Templar cross? Templar cross goes back a long way. Did you know that it is what we call the hologram of a photon? We have these 2 intersecting beams. There's another science there. It's very fascinating. You might say we have a science for stargates, how they could work. If we look at what we call an Einstein-Rosen bridge, or the spooky effect at a distance, or quantum entanglement. If we take an atom and split it, and we do something to it, it's going to change that atom thousands of miles away. That we could have it working like a tuning fork, where you have point A harmonized with point B. Could it be that we've lost touch with an ancient technology? The Sumerians knew. They were visiting us through these stargates too. When Muhammad and I have been in Egypt, we find stargates all over the place. And they all have symbolism above them, what they were used for, the star system they were connected to. If any of you have ever been to Egypt, have you ever visited Hatshepsut's temple? Okay, I see a lot of hands. Hatshepsut's temple, very interesting place. You see, when you come up to the front, you see these falcons, the falcon for Horus. This falcon never used to be a falcon. It was a serpent. They carved it into a falcon, meaning the energy used to flow into this place. When you go up to the top, you see the inscription there that it says it's a star disk, or a sun doorway, a stargate. You see that? Here's a foot, here's the star, here's the gate. You see that? And when you go in the back, you see a false door, a door to the netters, a door to the gods. Netter is God. Netter is also where you get the word nature from. The Greeks got it from them with the Greek physis and the Latin natura. And we're told that the power of the netters comes from the gods of the cosmic. Here's a doorway up to that area with these stairs. Can you imagine now a much different view of what it would be like if this was a stargate and there was great beings walking through this area to address the people? There's other things in this area I can't reveal today that gave it great energy and significance. I want you all to write this down for later, because don't just take what I'm saying and say it's infotainment, it's really interesting, that's a bunch of BS after you leave this. Look this stuff up. This stuff is going to give you something to go by. There's a place outside of Abu Sir, near the old city of Memphis in Egypt, and it's called Zayet El Aryan. Zayet El Aryan. This place has been guarded since the 1950s. It's heavily guarded by foreign militaries, our guys. And in that area, this is the last known picture that came out of this unfinished, magnificent, incredible area of an unfinished pyramid in 1950s. It's got an underground subterranean complex the size of New York City. Aircraft can come and go without being seen. It is Egypt's Area 51, and what I'm told, and I've had this confirmed from many places, there's a real live Stargate in there, like SG-1. You know, we've heard about these Stargates on shows like Star Trek with the transporter, Stargate SG-1. Well, they're real. Look it up. Look what it says about that place and the conspiracies. But here's an interesting one. If you go over to the area of Abydos, there's a fascinating temple there. We find up on the wall, we find this relief that looks like we find helicopters, planes, submarines, tanks. Do you guys see it? Yeah. How it looks? Well, for years, I'd be working on Muhammad. I'd say, hey, do you see it? He'd go, no, my friend. It's just a palimpsest. It's water erosion. Glyphs on top of glyphs. Nothing there. He's very pragmatic. Then he had a look at something that we explored together, and he thought, okay, maybe there's something more to it. Maybe they were able to go into time or something. Maybe there's more going on in this temple. I could go on forever about this temple and how amazing it is. These are 42 steps. There's 3 platforms, like 3 initiations. Osiris, the great god, before he was resurrected and regenerated, he was chopped up into 42 pieces. There's a lot of symbolism on this temple about what it's doing to your consciousness and changing you. But as you go up in there, behind Muhammad, you'll see one of these netters, these doors to the gods, that doesn't go anywhere. There's 7 of them at this temple, and they're called the Holy of Holies. They all have a different resonance sound to them. Remember how our universe works through frequency, resonance. When you go in there, it says that they're a Stargate. You see that on the left with the foot, the star, and the doorway? And behind it, we have the Osirion, which is this pre-cataclysmic structure that is made of granite, that is so magnificent, it's telling you something. The Pythagoreans thought it was so significant that they came there and put these flower of life patterns, 9 of them, in fact, up on the wall that look like they're so well done, it looks like it was done by a laser. But when we were there, I made a rather significant discovery. We find over here that there's these little cakes that were being fed to them in order to access these Stargates, like a key. You see those little triangles? Muhammad was so skeptical at first when I used to tell him about this stuff called mufkuts. I used to tell him about the white gold that I heard legends of that they could eat. There was a bioelectrical sort of substance that would upgrade them or change their DNA that was given to them. He'd say, no, my friend. I don't believe it. Until he started translating the glyphs. Here we have what is the mufkuts. They're feeding these cakes. What does that say, Muhammad?
According to the basic meaning, which I don't agree much with it, it's saying the hedge, white sha'id, white bread or white cake.
There
but
we
we
go.
don't have a cake this style, actually. Our cake, we all know the style of the cake.
So this is the
Brown.
white cakes.
Yes, that the word hedge means white.
So we started to make a very interesting discovery that there was a missing key. But in order to find out what this all means, you have to go back into 1904. I want to take you all back. There's a man named Sir William Flinders Petrie. He's with the British Royal Society, and he's going back into the Sinai to find what's called the Moses Mountain, Mount Horeb. Today we call it Sedabit al-Qadim. It's the great mountain of secrets. He goes up into this mountainous area, and as he goes up into it, he finds a secret cave, temple entrance that leads up into something dedicated to the goddess Hathor. It's a really interesting story. When he goes in there, he steps into this place, and he's astounded. He sees these hermetically sealed chambers all put up in a row, and he slides one of them open and finds this white powder. At first, he thinks he's at Charlie Sheen's house. And then, no, they let it blow all over the place at first. They're like, who cares? It's probably just aluminium, as the British say, aluminum or bone powder. But then they find out it's something much more precious. Up upon the wall, it says from the 4th all the way up to the 19th dynasty, these people were consuming this, the priests, the kings. There was something happening to them into the royal bloodlines and the dynasties. You know what's fascinating about this? That the discoveries in Egypt never took off for the dynastic Egyptians till the 4th dynasty. That's when things shot through the roof with their discoveries and buildings and structures and everything else. But we made another fascinating discovery. On this trip, we also had J.P. Hague, my friend, with us, that you guys are going to hear from next. And he's very intuitive. Not only is he a great lawyer and researcher, but he's intuitive. He started to pick up stuff leading up to the hieroglyphics of where they were manufacturing this stuff and extracting it potentially in their own laboratory from the Dead Sea. The mufkuts being given in this temple. So tell me what you saw intuitively.
Intuitively, I saw that the mufkuts were being heated, the cakes were being prepared, and I think we have physical evidence on the ceilings of smoke and on the walls, as confirmed by Muhammad. There's indeed a chimney or a chimney stack space in the roof.
So this is where the mufkuts was being cooked?
That's what I was being shown in this room. And then a priest in flowing, quite wide birth robes came out with the finished products and was administering it in a very private ceremony with about 3 people.
Wow. There's an area with a blackened chimney that we've confirmed leading up to the instructions on the wall, and he's seeing priests with long white flowing robes that are administering this stuff. It's pretty incredible. But what else have we heard about this Moses story? Other than the fact that that's Charlton Heston. Greatest Second Amendment activist, right? And the purveyor of God's law. So here he is holding the 10 Commandments, and we have all kinds of interesting stories about the 10 Commandments. We could go on and on about that. In the Hebrew book of Yashar, it says they were never given to Moses by the fiery finger of God in the mountain of Sinai. They were handed to him. And they came down from Egypt, probably from the Papyrus of Ani or the 42 negative confessions of Maat. They were Egyptian laws, just like the laws of Hammurabi. They go back a long way. But in this story, it's very interesting because he comes down from the mountain and he's furious. He's angry. He sees that down below the Israelites were busy with Aaron manufacturing a golden calf, and they were worshiping it that they made with the spoils of Egypt. It says in Exodus 32:20 of your Christian Bible, and I assure you, if you go get a King James Bible and look this up after you leave this room, you'll be astounded to find this passageway encoded into it. It says he orders them to burn it, to grind it into a powder, and consume it. It's very interesting that he says that. Not only that, but remember I told you they found a goddess, a temple dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Hathor has the ears of a calf, and there's a golden calf. It's a very interesting connection that we find here. We also find an interesting connection that the name for Egypt was never Egypt. That was the name given to Egypt by the Greeks. They called it Aegyptos. The name for Egypt was Kem or Kemet, and it meant the black land. And this has nothing to do with the ethnicity or the folks that were there. It has more to do with the black soil that was flooding up from the Nile, the black alkali soil. We get an interesting connection to this when we see a discovery that was made right here in America. You go back into the 70s and 80s, there was a man named David Hudson. And he was a cotton farmer out of the Yuma Valley of Phoenix, Arizona. And if you're a cotton farmer out there, you know something, that they have a black alkali soil. It's hard to grow on. Does that sound familiar? He has to go gather up copper, 93% copper, or 93% sulfuric acid from the nearby copper mines, and he has to spread it on his soil so he can grow crops. But he's got, a lot of time on his hands. He's worried about what Jimmy Carter's doing to the banking system at the time, so he's also an amateur in the minerals and looking for gold. So when he goes looking for this stuff, he does some tests on his land, and he finds a very strange material. And he starts to test this material. The material starts to turn red. He tests it on a spectron electron microscope. But at the time when they test this material, they only test it for about 15 seconds because that was the American method. They find nothing, just silicon, some nothing constituents, and he just dismisses it at first, but it starts acting weird like a noble metal, so he says, there's got to be more to this. So he contacts some friends that use the method from the Soviet Academy of Sciences, which tested it for 300 seconds. And lo and behold, they start to find this incredible result to it, that it starts to produce stuff like in the platinum group of metals: palladium, ruthenium, iridium, rhodium, gold. He's like, oh my God, this is crazy. It starts acting differently. It starts to have an effect, though, this weird effect to this material that he starts to find when he processes it, that when it's exposed to heat or radioactive areas, that it can become lighter, it can levitate. It has different properties when the human body takes it. It can regenerate you. Some people have these added cognitive abilities. It's an amazing material he starts to find. This was well documented, actually, by Sir Lawrence Gardner in his books that you can read, The Lost Secrets of the Sacred Ark. The late Lawrence Gardner, he was an incredible researcher. He calls this stuff monoatomic gold. And when he goes to patent this stuff, the amazing part about this is that his patents are seized in the name of national security, because it can do so many incredible things. But today, we don't call this stuff orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, is what they were doing back then. There's different mineral supplements on the internet, what people call Oramus. This is much different. He had a different process. He found ways to take down the atomic structure on this stuff. In fact, what he starts to discover, you know, when we take this down, we now call that not Oramus, we call it exotic states of matter, or a hyperdeformed nuclei. We're still studying this stuff. They spent millions of dollars testing this stuff. Gardner, of course, disappeared off the scene around the 90s. We're told he just gave up, threw his hands in the air. Gardner disappeared before him, but Hudson disappeared off the scene and gave up his hands, we're told, and just said, I give up. What's interesting we're told about this stuff is that if you take an atom, right? I want you to visualize this atom. You see the electrons whizzing around the nuclei. They said that there are these anti-electrons bonding with electrons that form this outward pushing toroidal field that could correspond with our DNA and everything else. It was a very interesting substance. I also want you to picture we go down to the level of subatomic particles. Take quarks, neutrinos, hadrons, leptons. When you go down to gluons and bosons, we're told you could fit an entire galaxy in one of those now. Think about how much power you could have with pure photonic energy with no mass if you could fit it inside of a box, like the Ark of the Covenant. Remember the Moses story? They were eating manna, the manna that they were charging? Well, again, Jordan's been talking about this for years. The Ark of the Covenant is not a Hebrew story. It was the Ark of the Contract. It's from Egypt. We find this if you go over any of these ancient temples. Go to Edfu, you'll see a mock ark. They're talking about it over at Abu Simbel. They're having arks that had anti-gravitational levitating abilities with ships that they were carrying them around. They were moving large things and making it lighter. This substance became lighter when we exposed it to certain fields. Remember, it's pure photonic energy. It's light, no mass. Remember the Egyptian Book of the Dead? The Egyptian Book of the Dead's real name is the Book of Coming Forth by Day, or by light. You're going through these negative confessions. You're having your transgressions or your sins weighed against you with Anubis there, and then there's a feather, Matt's feather, that can become lighter. What if this is a guide to living? What if it's a guide to initiation? Have any of you ever seen this depiction that's in the crypts of Hathor's temple that people lovingly on the internet call it the light bulb glyph when they're fighting over it all the time? It's not a light bulb in my opinion. I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's a lotus bowl. I think on the left over here, what you're seeing is you're witnessing a giant. But I want you to look very closely. Do you see around this guy, do you see that line, that little light line that's around him? That's his Ka. That's that energy body. The others don't have that around them. These are the giants giving the dynastic Egyptians the gift of the serpentine energies. In the middle over here, you see this guy here? His name is He. He stands for immortality or eternity. Down here we see this being gifted and pursued. These are in the crypts of Hathor's temples. This was the university of the mystery schools where you had to learn. Over here you had the Djed pillar, just like the Jedi. This is the spine, the raising of Osiris. This will eventually become straight. And it is coming up that kundalini we talked about, that bioelectrical energy, the upgrade to the DNA. Does this start to make sense to you now? When you look over at the Sistine Chapel, when you see the serpent climbing, when you see the light bearer. This brings us to another interesting figure, one of my favorites. His name is King Tutmosis III from the 18th dynasty. Very important figure in Freemasonry, very important figure in the Rosicrucians. In fact, to the Rosicrucians, they consider him their immortal deputy grand master, Menkaphun Ra. He's still alive today, according to them, running the show. Interesting. If you look over here, he had something called the Great White Brotherhood out of Karnak. You know why it's called the Great White Brotherhood? Because they were eating white cakes. This is the depictions that we find over them there of his treasuries. In fact, when Muhammad and I had been in Egypt, he was just there again taking a group in the last day on a tour. He was telling them about these lectures. Look on the wall. We don't have time to go into detail, but this is his treasury. You'll find gold, you'll find silver, you'll find all these things, and you'll find the cakes, and it says the white hedge, the white shite, over from the depictions in the hieroglyphics. What the hell are white cakes doing in a gold and silver treasury that we see them consuming? If you go back into our great alchemists, this is Paracelsus. His full name is Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Heinem. That's why we call him Paracelsus for short. Look at these guys. They got alchemy. They were looking for alchemy, right? This process came out of Egypt. The Arabs called it alchemia. It was passed down. We're so fortunate to have the great Jay Widener with us tonight in his magnificent book, The Great Mysteries of Hyundai. He talks about even Fulcanelli and others that were encoding the mysteries of alchemy into our cathedrals and more. Look at the Essenes, look at the groups. So many people died and went crazy because of this. You have Roger Bacon. Sir Isaac Newton was so obsessed with this stuff, a lot of these guys were choking back mercury, killing themselves trying to find the recipe. Nicholas Flamel, the Philosopher's Stone, all of that stuff comes from this. If you go over to Prague, anyone ever been to Prague? You got Rudolph II, the Powder Tower, the Golden Lane. All of that was from alchemy. Little known historical fact, pharaohs were buried with their arms crossed because they believed there would be countless water slides in the afterlife. What was this great obsession with transferring consciousness to somewhere? If you go over to the Vatican, next to the Egyptian wing of the museum, which is a Jesuit influence, you see that there's something called the Fontana della Pigna, the fountain of the pine cone. And this pine cone symbolism is very important because it represents your pineal gland, where we know your dimethyltryptamine is created, your DMT. This has been called the spiritual doorway to the brain by the likes of Dr. Rick Strassman. Behind it, you find the egg, which is not only like the Orphic egg, but it represents the thalamus. You see the two birds of the peacocks, which represent infinity or immortality from the Indian mysteries. But behind it, you find an open sarcophagus, representing the fact, like it says in the book of Matthew in the Bible, that once the single eye is open and be full of light, there shall be the gift of immortality. When we go over near Saqqara, we find this area called the Serapeum. It's this great underground area. We find these large boxes, very large, 1,000-ton, more granite boxes that are very sophisticated. They have primitive writing on the sides of them, like chicken scratch. They were used by the later Greco-Roman folks. What we believe is that these were some sort of regenerative chambers. Charles Hall mentioned boxes where there could be locator devices, and I believe that to be true. We found boxes like that too in very strategic places. These are very specific, though. They look like they are to house giants. We found 13 to 15-foot boxes and even more in other areas that we've uncovered in the subterranean chambers. Imagine maybe this was in some kind of cataclysmic period or put underground. Here's J.P. Hague and I visiting it.
All of them open in this underground chamber here at the Serapeum, except for one, which was blown up when we go back into the story of August Marriott in 1850. Well, what's fascinating about this piece in particular is that we see all this primitive writing, which according to Muhammad Ibrahim, was probably put there by the priests during Greek times, and just contains sort of spells. And we see that even further over here, down here with an empty cartouche. This was going to be sold when we go over and look at the priests. They were going to sell it over to the kings to be used as a tomb, but there's no way that the people that did these scratchings in it were the pre-dynastics, were magnificent. So what this was is that this was a regeneration chamber that when they would step in it, potentially after using the monoatomic white gold or the orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, the energy would come through them and it would transition to a place called the Plain of Sharon, which is absolutely amazing. But just check this out.
So these death cults that came along later, not much like our death cults we have today. You know, they make you all kinds of promises. If you pay the dues and join, we'll give you a free pass. There was a sloppy cartouche, a blank cartouche that was put on the side. There's no way the advanced and sophisticated civilization that were capable of creating this created that chicken scratch on the side they were selling. So what was going on? Well, what we're told is that there could be a transition you could have to what the Babylonians called the Plain of Sharon. You could step out of this world and still come back into this world. You could upgrade your body. To the Egyptians, they called it in the 5th Dynasty pyramid text, the Plain of Mufkuts, or the Field of Mufkuts, like hyperspace. William Buhlman and I had talked about this the other day, that there is an exact replica he's found of Egypt. There's an exact etheric realm. There's other parallel worlds and places we can go to and traverse to. When they stepped out, they become these shadow beings when coming back into our world. Have any of you ever heard of people seeing shadow beings? Yeah. Okay, so then that brings us over to our subject of ufology. If this has been going on a long time, if we've been visited, when are we going to get disclosure? Disclosure is happening right now. It's not going to happen from John Podesta or another candidate. Someone say, oh, if only Hillary Clinton would have gotten in, we would have been told. Trump's going to tell us for sure, right? No, they're not going to tell you. It's not going to happen. You're seeing it for yourself. How this works is you're going to eventually come to a point where you're being eased in. It's being fed to you in baby steps. You're going to see it for yourself. This is a process of something that cannot just be told to you. It cannot be given to you. But first, we got some things we got to go through in the future. A lot of people right now are worried about 5G. All your Facebook friends are sharing this stuff about 5G. Oh my God, 5G is going to kill us next week. We're dead, 5G. 5G is not great, maybe for the radiation at first, but we're very resilient beings. You know, back in 1903, we were very concerned, very, very concerned by the automobile and the locomotive, that once we reached speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, we'd have spontaneous combustion. Okay, so we are very resilient. We will adapt. We'll go, we go from megahertz, gigahertz, kilohertz, the tetrahertz. We haven't even begun to explore some of those. And you'll go very quickly into those. But eventually you're going to move into the quantum very quickly. And you'll have that IP address. It doesn't matter where you're going to be. You're going to have quantum communication. You can be under the ocean. In fact, Nikola Tesla, I'll move back here for a second. Nikola Tesla already figured out how to do this, how to get a signal out under the ocean, out into space. And we credit Marconi. Marconi never invented the radio. We're going to have replicators and dematerializers, okay? Just like that guy. I gave away the punchline there for a second. But you're going to be able to replicate any kind of food or object that you want at the subatomic level. We already are taking steps towards that. In fact, Deep Prasad, who's with us, he's already told me over dinner table he's developing the algorithm for that, as well as a new unified field theory. You know, Deep is the future. He's the new Michio Kaku. That's what I keep telling him. Holograms. I got a story for you guys really quickly. I got a few minutes here. We're almost done. Then you can get up and walk around, get coffee and water and all that great stuff. I won't bore you anymore. If you go back 30 years ago, I have a friend of mine. He's involved in all kinds of interesting situations. He was in Nevada 30 years ago in an underground facility, and he witnessed something called military-grade holograms. And he'd tell me, you guys think it's so great. You see Michael Jackson, Tupac Shakur performing on a stage, and you're all wowed by it, that this hologram is, wow, hologram is so amazing. He said, that is garbage technology. That we've already had the technology, he said, 30 years ago, when a holographic figure of a person that looks so realistic using denser subatomic particles that could walk through your front door, shake your hand, and hand you a document, then vanish before you. It works through photonic science. Photon moves at 300,000 kilometers per second. And they already have that ability, and in the future, not only is that how your policing, your military, your interactions will work, potentially, but also he told me that's how Netflix is going to work in the next 10 years. All the shows you watch at home are going to be interactive holograms very, very quickly. We already have the technology. You're going to have that very quickly here. Many people are worried about artificial intelligence. You don't have to worry about artificial intelligence directly. It's called machine learning. You're already using it. You're using it in your cell phones. You're using it every day. But what I have been told is that there is a concern over something called synthetic intelligence that comes from out there that's existed before we were on this planet. And it is aware of itself. So they have been aware of that, but our planet has safety measures intact, so potentially we don't have to worry about that. A lot of us are worried about microchips, RFID, the mark of the beast, all that kind of stuff we talk about. And we could go on and on about an interesting lecture about that. I mean, that's a fascinating journey into the mysteries if you want to look at that subject. But you don't have to worry about this. This RFID is already antiquated technology. It's already done is garbage. It's going to be out the window. It's T-Model Ford. Same with this. Neuralink that Elon Musk is developing with Neuralace. It's very primitive. It's basically touching the edge a little bit. It's going to excite some people, but we're going to go much further than that. The next step is transdermal tattoos you're going to have. You're going to have these transdermal tattoos. They're going to be used for medicine and everything else. And after that, the next step is we're going to be using these nanoparticles that we're going to inject into your body. And these are going to be graphene-based, only about an atom thick. We won't go into it, how they work. Silicon hexagonal structures that work your bioelectrical fields like a buckyball. These are going to go into the mitochondria of your cell, and they're going to unlock something in there. Today we have what we call a goblet. There's something you're going to be hearing about in 5 to 10 years from now. You can write it down and remember I told you. It's going to be called a foglet. We're going to unlock that, and they're going to be able to use the nitrogen and the hydrogen from outside of your body so you don't have to eat or drink again. Your body will create your own water and food. Eating and drinking is going to be optional. This will create a way for you to be connected to a quantum network, a field of information that will be in your nervous system, your optic nerve, everything, and integrate it. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this is not to say, don't go say, oh, that Jonny guy, he's promoting the mark of the beast. I'm telling you about this technology now because I was told it's important that we talk about it now. If we don't talk about it, it could be used to turn us into a hive mind, but we could use it like technological training wheels.
How do you spell that?
What, a foglet?
Yeah.
Foglet. Today we look at our computers. The computers, we look with Moore's law, right? Binary. With binary, we got ones and zeros. A 1 might mean yes, a 0 might mean no. That's how our computers communicate. But I want you to picture right now, you guys ever looked at those scrolls, like a Torah? Or you ever looked at cuneiform, like the tablets that you roll out? So you know what I'm talking about, right? Well, how I want to explain this to you is that our current computing today is like you've rolled out one of these scrolls. That's linear. So you're rolling it out on the table. But how quantum computing works is sort of like, have you guys ever heard about the secret life of trees? Why don't the leaves on trees burn when you have this photonic exchange of energy? When the information's coming down through the tree, there's a transbiotic exchange where we go from carbon and oxygen, step down at the nano level. These calcium, sugars and everything. This is moving very, very quickly. Very fast at the nanoscale. And it's coming down this very, very fast, and it's moving out the tree, and it's going up to miles away and helping other areas and trees and life forms grow all around the trees. In fact, one day we might find out that our trees are like antennas. They're very important on our planet. But when we start looking at quantum computing, it's rather interesting because you could take that scroll, and I want you to roll the scroll up in front of you. Roll it up into these very long tubes. And this is something, again, that Deep Prasad specializes in. Go to reactiveq.io if you want to find out more. Take a 1 and put it on top of that cylinder in front of you right now. Put a 0 right here. And in the middle, you have the infinite exchange of information, the nexus to null space. Put a 1 on the other side and a 0 over here. You have infinite information over here. At that level, we know every particle in our universe, backwards and forward. In fact, we know what little Julius Caesar had for breakfast on his 8-year-old name day and what he was thinking that morning when he got up. That's how powerful this technology is. And you might say that this technology already exists in a large underground facility in Utah called the NSA. But if we have all this, and we're aware of this, how do we make it to the future? Well, I got another Stargate for you. I got one more Stargate. This is the Stargate to the future of what's important moving forward, because this is not just information today to entertain you. Knowledge is useless without wisdom. So many people out there in the field of the esoteric and the mysteries and everything that can quote facts all day long, but where do you apply it in your life? Where does it start to make sense? Where do we start to make a difference in our lives? Okay? We need to start being more kind. Kindliness for each other. Start to really look at each other and how we can make a difference. Have tolerance for each other's beliefs or ideas, where we come from. These are universal principles. We should really respect the idea of sovereignty, which is universal. To be more generous, to not expect anything back in return. These universal traits are going to unlock great things. And we must be optimistic about our future. It's not enough to be optimistic. It's not enough to have good, positive thoughts and ideas. They must be matched with action. This must be matched with something that we can move forward with and really make a difference. And finally, leading up to this, I want you all to think about this. As I look to the row right over there, to you there in the front, did you know that right now you have 100 trillion cells in your body? There's 100 trillion atoms in a cell and 100 trillion cells in an atom. And atoms are made of mostly blank spaces. So that means if that's let's think about our whole planet. We could take 8 billion people and put them on the end of our pinky finger. That's how close we all are. Each and every single one of you is so intimately connected to not only each other, but to those folks we call extraterrestrials. We're going to find out one day that they're not much different than you and I. They've been here a long time, and we're a part of them. And in the future, we might go through some growing pains as we are now. And even if you see some dark things, I want you to remember, just like that little candle up there, that you can use your light to burn like beacons against the darkness. Your light is so powerful, each and every single one of you, and what you have. And don't ever forget that. And if you want to join me on an adventure, you can help me solve these cosmic mysteries together. I'm Jonny Enoch. Thank you.